Good evening, everyone. You're very welcome to tonight's webinar. We're just going to give people a couple of minutes just for any latecomers. So just bear with us for one moment. So you're all very welcome. For anyone just arriving, we're just going to give people another minute or two before we start the webinar, just for any latecomers. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I know we have over 800 people registered for tonight, so we're very excited. We're just going to give people another couple of minutes just for people to settle in. Welcome, everyone. We've just had one question in there. I think someone was asking, are they muted yet? We've just turned off everyone's sound and everyone's video just for the purpose of the webinar. Bear with us just for a minute or two and we can go through the housekeeping before we get our guest speaker tonight, Dr. Nicola Fox Hamilton. I'm sure you're all very excited to hear Nicola speak. So am I, and I'm sure tonight we'll get lots of takeaways to bring home, whether we're parents or whether in our professional life as well. Some tips and hints to help us. So we're just coming up to 7:31. You're all very punctual, and we will leave it another minute or two. I think we have over, I can see 330 attendees so far. We are expecting about 800. So thank you so much for registering. I hope everyone's keeping warm and safe wherever you are in Ireland or abroad. We've had huge interest in tonight's webinar. So just bear with us for one more moment and we'll be with you shortly.
thanks again everyone for registering and being with us here tonight for Safety Internet Day. I would say we'll give it another minute maybe, and then we'll start the proceedings tonight. We've just had one question there. Will a copy of this webinar be available online afterwards? No, I don't think so. I think we're just recording it for our internal use. But I will be leaving with you lots of information about further supports. Yeah, I know a few people were asking, do they need to mute themselves? We've taken care of all of that. So don't worry about that. We have muted and taken everyone's video off. So I know one person was asking, can they take a screenshot? We actually don't have PowerPoints tonight. It's more an informal talk from Dr. Fox Hamilton. So we don't actually have slides. Someone was asking, can their
teenager sit in on tonight? Absolutely, absolutely. That would be fantastic. And just a reminder, we've taken care of taking people's video off, and you're all muted as well. But feel free to use the chat function at any stage.
I think we can kick off now, Sinead. I'll take down this slide.
Fantastic. So, good evening and a warm welcome to, I know we have a lot of parents here tonight from all across the country and even abroad, so you're all very, very welcome. My name is Sinead McKee and I work for the ISBCC Childline, and I'll be your host and your MC tonight. So just to give a bit of a background, the Irish Safer Internet Centre is a partnership of 4 leading organisations, including the ISBC Childline, as well as Webwise, Hotline.ie and the NPC Primary, the National Parents Council. And the mission is to make the internet a better place for children and young people under the coordination of the Department of Justice. So on behalf of the Centre and of all the partners, we're absolutely delighted you can attend tonight's seminar. This is just one of a series of webinars this week to mark Safer Internet Day 2021 on the theme of Be Kind Online. Just a bit of housekeeping before we start. Our guest speaker tonight is Dr. Nicola Fox Hamilton, and she will focus on the theme of empowering healthy online behaviours in teenagers. We've had a question in, can their son or daughter who is a teenager join us? Absolutely, that would be fantastic. Just a reminder, the webinar is being recorded. That's just for our internal use only. And our guest speaker, Nicola, will talk for approximately 20 minutes, and we will leave approximately another 20 minutes for Q&A. So please use the chat function if you have any questions towards the end. Your questions will remain anonymous, and it'll just be the panelists who see that. Before you leave tonight, I will also pass on some information regarding further supports for parents. And finally, we at the end will do a quick poll just to gain your feedback on what you thought about tonight. I know as a parent myself and as a professional working in the field, I'm really excited to hear tonight's guest speaker. So without further ado, I would like to warmly welcome Dr. Nicola Fox Hamilton to our virtual stage. Nicola holds a master's degree and a PhD in cyberpsychology and is a lecturer in psychology and cyberpsychology at the Institute of Art, Design and Technology. She has written several book chapters and papers in the field of cyberpsychology, in particular on technology and relationships. We are very honoured to have her speak with us tonight. So I'll hand you over now to Nicola.
Thank you so much, Sinead. I really appreciate you inviting me, and I'm delighted to be here. So Sinead has introduced me very well. I won't say a huge more about me. I'll talk some about my research in a little while, where it's relevant. But I thought, the internet is so huge, everything we can do on it, there's so many possibilities. So I'm going to focus on a few key areas that I think are perhaps most helpful to you and most related to the topic of Safer Internet Day this year and to these webinars, so online well-being. So I'm going to touch on a few things like the issue of screen time, which I know is something that lots of parents are concerned about, how to empower young people to behave in healthy ways and support their well-being online. We'll look at some of the aspects of the internet that might get in the way of that, so difficulties that they might have or where they might not be their best selves. And I'll also take a look at some risky behavior online, particularly because Coco's Law was signed into law today. I'm going to look at that and some issues around that specifically. And then I'll talk a bit about how kids handle problems online and how well able for it they are. So like I said, the internet is, vast and there's so many possibilities on it. The online world is really important to young people. Those of us who grew up without it when we were young might still view it as being very separate to the real world, perhaps. But these days it really isn't. It's inextricably linked with our offline lives. It's a place where young people can explore, they build their social identities, they express themselves. They're obviously learning online a lot at the moment. They play, they connect with other people, they get social support. It's a huge part of their lives. And as they become adolescents, because I know a lot of you are parents of teens or perhaps teachers of teens, teenagers start to become independent from their parents. They go through a process of emancipation from them, and their peer group becomes more important to them. And technology helps enable that by connecting them with their peers. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is screen time, because this is something that's reported in the media so often. And there's a huge amount of moral panic about it. And moral panic has been around for years. So every time a new technology comes into society, there's a moral panic about it. Particularly, it used to be when it related to women and children. These days, it's mostly children. So we used to get headlines like dime store novels will turn our boys into killers. These days, it's screen time is like drugs for our children. Giving your child a smartphone is like giving them a gram of cocaine. And of course, researchers have not done a study to see if a smartphone is like a gram of cocaine, because that would be highly unethical. But it's also not true. So what I'll talk about is the research on this and what it actually means. So the research is much more positive and nuanced than the headlines might let you believe, of course, because they're designed for clicks, not necessarily for accuracy. A lot of our early research on the screen time was based on how long people said they spent on time, which we now know doesn't actually bear any relationship to actual behavior. So now we're able to measure actual behavior through screen time tracking on phones and things like that. And what we found from a number of big studies is that people's actual behavior on their screens and on social media has very little relationship with well-being. So it looks like it accounts for about 0.5% of the difference in well-being. technology use in general. So things like having a good breakfast account for a huge amount of well-being, getting a good night's sleep, you know, having parents who care about you or look after you, or carers who look after you well, much, much more important than your amount of time spent on technology. And additionally, screen time is really quite a meaningless concept when you think about it. When you think about what you do on screen during the day, it's not just one thing. You know, if your kids are talking to their grandparents or their friends, that's probably a positive thing. Or if they're laughing because of funny videos they're watching on TikTok, or they're creating content for it and having fun doing it, or they're learning about interesting things, or they're finding their voice and being an activist, that's all very positive. If they're spending 10 hours a day watching unboxing videos, that's probably not so good for them. So looking at what people are actually doing online is hugely important, rather than how much time they're spending. And there's a lot of like pathologization of normal and healthy behavior. So again, we see lots of headlines about, you know, video games are turning our children into zombies or killers, and people spending too much time on their phones means they're not talking to each other anymore. This isn't really the case. You know, when you think about what you do on social media, it's time spent connecting with your friends. And we don't pathologize spending time with your friends. We wouldn't pathologize it if they were talking to them on the phone, like some of us used to do when we were kids, you know, physically talking on a landline phone. And so we shouldn't automatically pathologize it when they happen to be connecting in a different way, because times change and the way that kids connect to each other changes with it. So I think it's really important that, you know, the use that's appropriate for your child will change depending on their age, on what they're able for, and you know your child best. So what's really important is to keep the lines of communication open with your kids, share activities if possible, you know, play games with them, share TikTok videos with them, particularly when they're younger. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But like right now, we're in a pandemic, and our online world is keeping us connected. It's keeping us working, learning, entertained. It's doing a lot for us. And I think parents can really give themselves a break about how much time kids are spending online. If they're fed and they're getting some learning and they're getting some physical activity and they're loved, then how much time they're on a screen isn't as important as what they're doing on the screen. And if they're connecting with friends, that's hugely important for them to maintain and build their social network. So we know that goal-directed and purposeful social interactions online can enhance social supports and contribute to well-being. But if you use your online interactions and the internet for procrastination, or very passively, that can have quite negative effects on well-being. So passive use is where you're online and you're just scrolling, or doom scrolling as the term is. You're observing or lurking on social media. You're looking at your news feed without actually contributing at all. And that can be problematic, particularly on social media, because it can lead you to believe that everybody else's life is quite perfect, like an unrealistic highlight reel of everybody else's life. And that can lead young people and everybody to negatively compare themselves to other people, to start envying other people for their perfect lives. But if you're actively involved in posting yourself, you understand the selection process that goes into what you post. So we don't post every single thing on social media. We know that people post mostly positive things, not always, but mostly positive things. And they don't necessarily show themselves bored or upset about things or arguing with their parents. They tend to show the more positive things. So if you're actively posting, you understand that others are also going through that selection process. And it helps you understand that other people's lives aren't necessarily perfect. You know, they're just presenting themselves to look better than things are, perhaps. And that also, by actively engaging, it helps you connect with people, and it helps you gain social support when you're online. So it's actually really important to be quite active about it, rather than just doom scrolling or passively browsing. And we also know that loneliness and fatigue can drive passive use. And obviously we're in our third lockdown. It's been long. People are more lonely, perhaps. We're certainly tired of it. People aren't necessarily feeling their best. They're also bored. So I think it's really important to be very mindful about how we're using social media and the internet. And for kids, time spent with family, obviously, if they get along well, and time spent outdoors doing physical activity are hugely important, along with spending time with their friends online. So it's important to get that balance. I think that's really key. It's also important to pay attention to how people feel after they socially interact online and after they do anything online, because that's more related to your well-being than what you're specifically doing or how long you're doing it for. So if you come away from social media feeling very positive about your interaction, you had a nice chat with your friends, or you enjoyed looking at their images, or you saw some videos that were fun, or you learned something, that increases people's well-being. But if you feel negative about it, so if you come away feeling envious of other people's lives, or that you don't have enough going on, that can decrease people's well-being in the moment. Now, it doesn't necessarily increase or decrease long-term overall well-being, but certainly in the moment, it can increase or decrease it. So it's good, I think, to be very reflective about your online behavior and to ask your kids to be reflective about their online behavior. And the reason I keep saying is because a lot of what we do online is similar for children and adults. So I'll talk to you, but it's also hugely relevant for what your teenagers are doing as well. You know, there's no difference depending on age. For some things there are, but for this there isn't. So being reflective about what makes you feel good, what makes you feel positive is really important. And also to notice what doesn't make you feel good and to maybe do less of that and more of the things that make you feel good. So sometimes journaling or some kind of reflective process can be really helpful with that. Social support is one thing that can help alleviate loneliness and anxiety. And we know that younger people are more likely to feel loneliness and anxiety than older people. They're also less likely to ask for support. And some research has shown that social media can actually be quite a constructive coping measure when it's used well. So when it's used for humor, to connect with friends, that's actually quite good for helping people cope, particularly with anxiety, but also with loneliness. So social media can actually be a positive. But I think a lot of people have found, particularly in the lockdown, that connecting one-on-one with somebody or in a very small group of maybe 3 people is much more effective than connecting in a big groups. So I'm sure many of you, as I have taken part in big Zoom quizzes or big group chats. And it's actually really difficult because everybody has to take their turn and you can't talk over people and it's less natural. And particularly for people who are a bit more extroverted, that's quite difficult because they tend to be more spontaneous in how they engage. But one-on-one or in a group of 3, it's much more natural and much more like a face-to-face conversation. And so people are finding that much more useful for social connection. So I'd recommend that for your teenagers, to connect with their friends on a kind of a deeper level. The big group ones are quite fun sometimes, but you also need, I think, a bit more human connection in the smaller groups. So I asked a lot of people about what they'd like to know in a seminar like this. And I got all the very scary stuff that everybody's terrified is going to happen to their children. Lots of stuff about screen time. But one answer that I really liked was someone said, "I'm a little naive and I think my child would never not be kind." And I think that's brilliant to be aware of that, because so many people believe that their own children are going to be really good. They worry about bad things happening to their kids, but not always about how their kids might be treating others online, because they're not necessarily seeing their own kids online. They see them face to face, and how we behave online can be a little bit different to how we behave face to face. So there's a number of factors that might encourage our kids to behave in ways that they wouldn't offline. One of them is, and a big part of it is, the online disinhibition effect. And this is sometimes caused by anonymity, but not always. A big part of it is that the person you're talking to online is invisible to you. And so you may not view them as, you know, a full human with fears and emotions and sensitivities and the capacity to be hurt just like them. And so people also tend to group others by their social identity. So a Man United supporter or a Justin Bieber fan or whatever it is, and not as an individual. And this can lead to people behaving towards others in ways that they wouldn't do offline. So making comments that they would never say to somebody face to face. This is where you see, if you look at something like the comment section of the Journal, or you look at Twitter, and people say horrendous things to each other. And they generally wouldn't do that face to face. We tend to behave quite well face to face. And so you need to, I think, talk to your kids about how this works online and why they might say things or act in ways that they wouldn't offline. and to remember that the people that they're talking to are also humans, because just because you can't see their reaction when you say something mean to them doesn't mean that they're not feeling the same things that you would feel if you had someone say that to you. It also explains why kids will do more risky things online that they would offline, and I'm going to discuss some of those in a minute. But before I do, it's not all bad. There's a good side of disinhibition as well. So what I just talked about is toxic online disinhibition, where people will say nasty things or be cruel, or even as far as, send death threats and things like that. Sometimes that's because they forget somebody is a real person. But the good side of it, benign disinhibition, means that it can be easier to open up and to share and to seek support, particularly about things that are more difficult to talk about in person. So for example, there's quite a bit of research that shows that LGBT young people often find a very supportive community online. It helps them understand themselves. It helps them explore who they are. It often helps them come out to family in a constructive and helpful way, because they talk to other people about their experiences coming out and they figure out the best way to go about it. And in the worst case scenario, it often helps them deal with the aftermath if it doesn't go well coming out to family. There's a huge amount of support there for LGBT youth, but it's also there for people suffering from illnesses, from other difficulties in their life. Kids are sometimes more able to talk to each other or to reach out and seek support online than they are offline. So what are the kinds of risky behavior that young people do? Well, there's loads of it, and I'm not going to talk about all of it. What I will say is that a lot of the bad things that I'm about to talk about are really comparatively rare. Mostly kids are fine, and I'll talk about that as well in a moment. But what I'm going to talk about is sexting and sending nudes and unsolicited graphic images, because Coco's Law was published today. So first of all, I'll start with sending unsolicited graphic images, which are often called dick pics or messages. And we know that young people do this. So there's research on it now. There wasn't for a while, but there is now. About 30% of girls are asked to send nudes in Ireland, and they're also more likely to receive unsolicited images. So about 30% of them get unsolicited graphic images from guys. So there's some research looking at why boys do this, and it is primarily boys. A very small percentage of girls send unsolicited images, but it's very small. And I think this is something that's really important to talk to your boys about. So they don't mostly do it maliciously. They do it because they're showing off, because they think they'll get images in return. They're doing it because they think that girls will like them and be excited by them and be attracted to them. They think it's basically a mating strategy, which it's not, because girls don't like these. They find them to be a violation a lot of the time. It makes them very uncomfortable, and then they feel pressured to feel like it's part of a joke and that they should just laugh it off and not react to it. And they can find it quite disturbing. And it is actually image-based sexual abuse. So showing someone sexual imagery when they're not consenting to it is image-based sexual abuse. And one of the things that I find really interesting from the research is that when boys are asked about girls' reactions to these images, they say, yeah, I know they say that they don't like them and they get angry about them, but actually they really do like them and they're excited by them, but they can't say it, because if they say they like them, they'll be slut shamed. So they actually think that girls want to receive these images. And girls clearly don't. It is unequivocally clear the girls really don't want to receive these messages. And I think that's something where education has a huge part to play. I think, there's law there that you shouldn't be sending stuff like that, but primarily where it needs to be dealt with is through education, through parents having conversations with their boys about this kind of topic. So yeah, men and women think very differently about those kind of images. In terms of more consensual behavior, the majority are not involved in sending nudes at all. So like about 75% don't send nudes in Ireland. So, it's not as common as you might think. Everybody's not doing it. Girls are more likely to be asked to send them. and both are equally likely to send them to each other. Boys are definitely more likely to ask for images, and that can also put pressure on girls to feel like they have to share. So that's another place where I think it's really good to talk to boys about consent and not pressuring girls into sharing images when they're not ready to or where they don't want to. Now, most of the sharing does happen with a partner, and it's a form of expression, of sexual exploration, and again, of emancipation or independence, which, you know, everybody goes through in their teen years or early 20 years. Where this can go wrong, and mostly doesn't go wrong, most people are fine with it, but where it can go wrong is if the partner shares those images. So we know that the taking and sharing of intimate images without consent is abuse, and Coco's law has now criminalized it. We know it has significant harm for victims. They feel violated, very anxious, sometimes suicidal. They don't know who's seen the images. They don't know when they'll be taken down or if they can ever be all taken down, because sometimes when they're spread online, you don't know where they've gone. And Coco's law specifically now has criminalized any distribution or publication of intimate images that have been taken without consent or threatening to do so in order to cause harm. But it's also now criminal to do it without causing harm. And I think that's really important, because what these laws are saying is, you know, law tells society what is reasonable behavior and what isn't. They're not just about punishment. They're a social construct to help us understand the norms of society and what is and isn't acceptable behavior. And this law lets us know now that this sharing of intimate images without consent, even if you don't intend it to be harmful, is illegal and wrong. And the law applies to children as well as adults. So if your teenager shares their girlfriend's image or somebody else's girlfriend's image, that is now an illegal behavior. So it's something that's really important to talk to kids about. Like I said, most kids are actually fine. They're very resilient. They handle problems very well. A small number of kids are more vulnerable than others. Cyberbullying is actually the biggest problem online. Out of all of the things you might think of that are terrible that could happen to kids, cyberbullying is the most important. Most kids are still fine, even if they're cyberbullied a bit. Where cyberbullying really becomes problematic is where it builds on offline bullying. And then the bullying, they can't escape from it, and it sort of compounds it and makes it into a much bigger problem. So that can be hugely problematic. What's really important to help kids deal with problems is to keep talking to them, to develop trust. This isn't a one-time conversation that you have with kids, it's a continuous conversation. It's important to let them know that if they come to you with something that happened, that you won't be angry with them. Even if they were doing something online that they shouldn't have been doing, that you'll be open and listen to their upset about whatever it is, that you'll recognize that even if you don't fully understand why they're upset, because whatever technology they're using, you don't fully understand, listen and kind of understand their upset and try not to be immediately angry and kind of overreact. Kids often think that parents will take their technology away from them if something bad happens, and they'll see that as a punishment. So if they're cyberbullied online and you take their phone away, you're basically removing them from their social network who can help them deal with it. And that's a punishment for them, for somebody else doing something bad to them. Now, there may be a time when it's appropriate to delete an app or to impose some boundaries, but don't let it be the immediate response. If you can, try and have a more democratic response where you talk to your kids about what's happening and work out responses to it. Offline factors tend to affect well-being much more than online factors. So personality traits like sensation seeking, low self-esteem, or psychological difficulties like anxiety or learning difficulties, those things are much more impactful than being online. And we live in a time that's increasingly uncertain. There's more insecurity and inequality. Families tend to be more dispersed and have different structures. And we know that there's increases in depression and anxiety with young people, but all of the substantive quality research so far indicates that they are not related to screen time or social media use. So hopefully that will put your mind at ease for that side of things, and you can focus on the things where you can help your children get through some of the more difficult aspects of online behavior. For vulnerable children, you know, the internet might put them at higher risk. And like I said, each of you knows your child better than anybody else. And so it's important to, you know, be aware of what's appropriate for that particular child. Every child's not alike. So My own research looks at how we get to know somebody online. Specifically, I was looking at online texts, and if somebody reads an online text, how well they're able to determine what somebody else's personality traits are like from that. Turns out we're really bad at it. And one of the reasons for that is that we're missing a lot of the face-to-face cues online. So when you can't see somebody's facial expression, you can't hear their tone of voice, etc., then it makes it much more difficult to get to know somebody kind of accurately. And that can be a little bit of a problem for making new friends online. At the very extreme end of the scale, you have things like catfishing or online grooming, relatively rare, thankfully. But more commonly, there's no toxic motive involved. It's just that when you have these gaps in your knowledge, you tend to fill them in with information inside your head. And that can lead to like an idealized impression of somebody. And when that happens, it's called hyperpersonal communication. And you might feel a heightened sense of emotions and intimacy. And that leads you to maybe sharing things that you might not normally. So information or images or texts. So that's something to be quite careful of when talking to people that you don't know online. And kids talk to people that they don't know online, and that's okay. There are benefits to be had from that. There's quite a lot of kids who meet new friends online, meet them offline, and it goes very well. So there are benefits to be had from that. It's not universally bad, but they just need to be a little bit aware of that, I think, as well. It's also important for parents, I think, to look at their own behavior. So often you hear, if parents are on their phone, then, how are the kids going to know how to do differently? Being on your phone a normal amount is fine. If you are completely immersed in your phone and just sustained use of technology all the time, that can have a negative effect. But I think most people aren't doing that. One thing to be aware of, though, is that kids don't particularly enjoy parents posting images and content about them without asking. So about a third of kids across the EU aren't very happy about that. So I would say be careful and ask permission, ask their consent, even when they're quite young, if you can, because you're leaving a footprint that'll be there, for their lives when they become aware of it. And parents, I think, sometimes don't think about that so much. If you think back to, what you did when you were small, you might not want that to be online permanently now. So I think I'm going to leave it there because I think I may have slightly gone over the 20 minutes, and I'll go back to Sinead. But hopefully you got some useful information and useful tips out of that for helping your teenagers understand how they behave online.
Nicola, thank you so much. That was so useful and so informative. I've been here taking down so many notes. A few standouts for me was just that reassurance that as a parent, we know our children best. Sometimes we're seeking out guidance from everyone around us, but sometimes it is about, I suppose, trusting our gut as a parent and really monitoring our child. What is their mood like after engaging in whatever it is they're doing. I really like that. And I suppose I also liked, when I heard you speak, it is about balance, finding balance in life. And my final point before we go to the questions is there is a lot of sensationalizing of issues around the internet. As you said, I haven't really thought about that much. That is clickbait for people, good news doesn't sell newspapers, So listen, thank you so much. As someone working in the field, but as a mom as well, I just found that so informative. I could listen to you all night. So listen, we're going to take some questions. I know my colleague Fiona has been taking in the questions. Now, I think Fiona has kind of grouped and themed the questions because there's a lot coming in, so she's kind of grouped some of them together. So we'll take a listen to some of the questions.
Great, thanks Nicola and Sinead. So the first one, Nicola, so what tips might Nicola have for starting that conversation with my soon-to-be 14-year-old about what healthy online behaviour looks like? And should I sign up to some of the apps she is using to see what all the fuss is about?
Great questions. I think that, first of all, like I said, parents need to make a judgment on whether their kids are able to deal with seeing things online that they might not like, or encountering things online that they might not like. And everybody knows where their own kids are at with regards to that. But I think it's important from as early as possible and as constantly as possible to have a discussion about the kinds of things that kids might see. So sexual images or violent images, you know, dangerous or risky challenges, viral challenges, misinformation, all those kind of things, I think need to be regular conversations. So if something comes up in the news, that's a good place to start a conversation about it. So it's not a once-off talk. And then it's important to talk through how the kid would deal with it if these kind of things happen, if they come across them, and explain how to block, report, mute, etc. And that they should come and talk to you if there's anything that upsets them, without worrying that you'll be angry, that you'll take away their tech. So again, it might be appropriate to delete a particular app if there's problems or abuse happening on it, but that should be discussed in a kind of a democratic way. Also, when you have these conversations, don't focus on just all the bad things online. First of all, it makes kids far more curious about all the bad things that are happening and trying to go find them, but talk about the opportunities as well, to learn, to play, to connect, to open up their worldview, to have their voices heard, and so on. And please do check out the apps they're using and set up your own accounts on them. Most of these apps are really fun. TikTok's brilliant. But particularly when they're younger, joint use at the start might be more appropriate. So set up the account with them and set up your own account at the same time. Spend some time with them at the start, liking things that are appropriate for them, so that the app can start to curate their timeline, make the algorithms work for them, basically. Encourage them to share things with you that they find that are interesting or fun, and do the same with them. If you're on TikTok, do duets with them and embarrass the hell out of them. No, maybe don't do that. And keep an eye on things until they're older. So as you see that they're more able to deal with things and that they're comfortable, then you can step away a little bit. But let them know that you're there for them, I think is really important. And WebWise has brilliant resources for how to talk to young people about a lot of these things about being online, but also lots about the apps. So if you're not so tech savvy, then go through and look at how to use the apps and how to set the privacy settings and make sure that their profile is private if they're young, and so on. So, don't use your own lack of knowledge about them to kind of shut down your kids' ability to explore really good things online, I think is important.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Nicola. So the next kind of theme that's been coming in has been about screen time, which probably won't surprise you. I suppose a lot of people have kind of commented on how that they're absolutely delighted to hear the debunking of the screen time concept, and great to hear research-based information and not sensational. So I suppose some of the things under screen time, just to consider for your answer is, do you think there's sometimes that there's a generation gap, that parents don't necessarily understand the new playground children are having fun in? Any tips for a parent to break their own phone addiction? And maybe a good strategy to withdraw social media from a young teen, if a parent is concerned about a pattern of worry or stress in them. And then I suppose the question that always comes with screen time, how long is appropriate? And this probably links back to your point earlier about getting the balance right with other activities.
Okay, so there's loads there. I might have to ask you to remind me of a couple of those. How much is too much is kind of like asking how long's a piece of string. You don't want your kid to be online for 18 hours a day, because then they're not getting physical exercise, they're not interacting with their family. Finding a balance between school, social time, etc. is important. And I think talking to your kid and setting boundaries together is really important, so that then they've agreed to them and they can't say they're unfair if you say it's time for the phone to be shut off and to go for a walk. Tips for dealing with our own screen time problems as adults. I know that when I'm stressed, I tend to doom scroll on Twitter. And that's quite a difficult thing to break, because it's also a useful platform for me professionally. And so I have good excuses for using it. I found an app during the end of my PhD when I was very stressed, called Forest, which is really good. It rewards you. It's quite a lovely little app that rewards you for not picking up your phone. Little things like that can actually be really helpful if you're struggling. But also finding time to do other things that you really enjoy, like picking up a book and so on. So remembering the non-screen based things that we enjoy. Can you remind me of the other couple of parts of that question?
Sorry, Nicola. Yes.
Sorry, put you on the spot.
No, you're grand, that's fine. Just in relation to where a parent might be worried or concerned about their young teens I suppose, behaviour, that they might be worried or stressed when they are on social media. Is there any kind of good strategy or good tips to, I suppose, support a withdrawal of social media, kind of abrupt or gradual?
I think that the only way of dealing with that perhaps is to have a conversation, or more than one conversation, with your child. So there may be certain aspects of social media that are causing them problems that you can help them deal with by unfriending people, blocking people, or it might be that they're spending too much time just scrolling through everybody else's things and they're feeling bad about themselves because of it. So there might be parts of it that are good that you can help them focus on, and parts of them that are bad that you can help them move away from. If it's a case that they're being cyberbullied on a particular platform, sometimes removing that platform for a while can help, but it doesn't always, because they might be aware that things are still being said about them on the platform when they're not there. And that can be almost worse because you don't even know what's happening. So it is, I think, about having a conversation and figuring out the best possible path between the parent and child. I think that's really important.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nicola. So I'm conscious now we're kind of coming to the end of the webinar, so perhaps we might just squeeze in one more. And I suppose this kind of comes under the theme of, as you kind of referred to it, online disinhibition, and how there can be nasty and benign online disinhibition, and how sometimes marginalized groups, they can find support online. So just one comment that came in was around that there are several studies that confirm correlations between excessive internet use and self-harm behaviour, although the aforementioned studies also mention the positive effects of the internet as a support to help people who self-harm. So do you think that the negativity that surrounds the use of the internet or social media, that at the same time it actually may well be our best medium to help dissolve the barrier to access to support for some of those youth that may see themselves as marginalized?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the problems with the internet, that it is sometimes the cause and solution of problems for the same people. And again, that might be about, choosing which behaviors you decide to do. So I know for self-harming, there are communities of young people that talk about self-harm. And some of those communities are very supportive. So the kids generally, when they get into the community, have already been self-harming. The community isn't causing them to self-harm. And this is coming from some of the latest research I've read. And within that community, people are very supportive and they help each other. The downside of that is that people stay in the community and may not take the next step to recovery because they're being supported by other people who are feeling the same as them. So, for every situation, there can be positives and negatives. So they might find support and they might find it easier to talk about things in a space like that, but then find it difficult to move outside of that. And, lots of marginalized groups find huge support online, but they also face a barrage of abuse online as well. So it's finding your network, your supportive group, and trying to remove other people from that as much as possible, I think.
Thanks very much, Nicola. We have had a huge amount of questions, and unfortunately time isn't going to allow us to go any further, but I just wanted to finish up by just letting people know about further supports for parents. So webwise.ie is a parents hub, and it's a fantastic resource for parents with practical, jargon-free advice on a range of topics, including what we talked about today: screen time, image sharing, and social media. And it also features very useful talking points or conversation starters for sensitive subjects, such as accessing inappropriate content or image sharing. So check that out. Obviously, us in the ISPC, we have our own parenting hub, and we have a support line for parents, which is open Monday to Friday. So please do not hesitate to get in touch with us, especially if tonight triggered something for you and if you'd like to talk in confidence with us. And of course, we have our listening service, Childline, which is available 24 hours a day. The phone number is 1-800-666666. Young people can chat to us at childline.ie, and they can text the word talk to 50101. Finally, we have the National Parents Council Primary, and that offers advice and support and can be accessed via its helpline 01-887-4477 or online at nationalparentscouncil.ie. So before we finish up, thank you to Fiona from the ISPCC and Roisin and all the team from the Department of Justice for their preparation in organising tonight's fantastic event. I think really what, you know, the content tonight was so useful, and it really shows there is a huge appetite out there for this information for parents. And it's definitely something for us all for future planning, you know, to look at this issue in greater detail again. Thank you especially to our guest speaker, Nicola, for such an informative and useful talk. I know she's had a very busy day. She was on TV first thing this morning and radio and doing lots of media today. So thank you so much for your time, Nicola. And finally, thank you to everyone here for tonight. We have had a fantastic interest and in tonight's webinar, and thank you for making time for this. And before you go, just a quick reminder, we are going to launch a quick poll. It should only take 20 seconds of your time, just to gain a little bit of feedback about what you thought about tonight. So thank you so much for that. So the feedback poll just has a few questions, you know, what was your overall impression and how useful was the information? So thank you once again before you go for just filling that in very quickly for us. And we wish everyone best of luck, and don't forget those ongoing supports are there from the partner organisations. So thank you and good night.
Thank you, Sinead. I'll let the poll run.
Perfect. Thank you, Roisin.
Thank you.